You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 8th of October 2025 on Monocle Radio.
France waits to find out if its prime minister is resigning after all. Texas invades Illinois at the direction of the US president. And is climbing Everest worth either the risk or the Instagram material? I'm Andrew Muller. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Muller. My guests Philippe Marlier and Terry Stiastny will discuss today's big stories, and we'll hear from the Wall Street Journal's Drew Hinshaw and Joe Parkinson about their new book looking at the modern theory and practice of prisoner swaps, including the one involving their colleague Evan Gershkovich. Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily. I'm Andrew Muller, and I am joined today by Philippe Marlier, Professor of French and European Politics at University College London, and Terry Stiastny, political journalist and author most recently of Believable Lies, the misfits who fought Churchill's secret propaganda war. There you go, Terry, another clanging plug for your fine new book, in the service of clangingly plugging which you have recently ventured to an English city with distinct military resonance.
Yes, I was in Hereford, which is a place I've never been to before. And as you say, they have a new festival of military history, which is drawing on, their military traditions. They're the home of the SAS. And if you go to Hereford Cathedral, where one of the events I was doing was, there's an amazing modern stained glass window commemorating people from the SAS. And also, if you're ever going to Hereford, and it's a bit out of the way, which is why lots of people haven't been, they've got the Mappa Mundi, which is the most astonishing 14th century map of the world, which is just really worth looking at. It's how people saw the world in those days. And like Jerusalem at the centre, Babylon a bit further up, and the Mediterranean sort of turned on its side. And once you get sort of the idea of it, you're like, oh, I see, yeah, I get it. And they did actually know more about the world than you would imagine they did.
They'd never heard of Australia, though, had they?
I don't think they got as far as Australia. Sri Lanka is certainly on there, and India is there. But yeah, I'm not sure about Australia.
And Philippe, we will be talking very shortly about French politics, but you are shortly off on safari to do some research into a particular aspect of it.
Yes, I'm heading off to a town near Lille in northern France, which used to be for over a century a bastion of French socialism, so very left-wing, each election being won by the left, by the socialists, until 2014 when the town hall was won over by a man from the National Rally, the far-right party, very close to Marine Le Pen. Then Marine Le Pen herself got elected, the local constituency. And then since then, it's been a very rock-solid place for the far-right. So I'm writing up a book about the mainstreaming of far-right ideas in France. So I thought, let's do some field work and let's go and speak to those people.
Well, we will start the show proper in France, not least as there is a non-zero chance of Philippe being asked to have a lash at being Prime Minister by the time this programme ends. Sébastien Lecornu, holder of that office as of this recording, had been asked by President Emmanuel Macron to delay his resignation at least until today in the hope of persuading the rancorous National Assembly to pass a budget and therefore not bring down yet another government. Lecornu is due to appear on French television about an hour from now and explain what he has come up with, though preparatory briefings were actually surprisingly positive. Philippe, we are in that glorious golden hour before something actually happens in which we can just speculate wildly. What do you think he's going to say?
I like the word or the verb speculate, because that's exactly the right word. If I could read through a crystal ball, I would tell you what kind of political future lies ahead for France. But I'm a political scientist, so I can just speculate. And no one knows exactly what's going to happen, because Lecornu, who is technically no longer Prime Minister, is an outgoing Prime Minister, was charged by Macron to form another government, having failed. Or, in fact, he formed a government which lasted exactly 15 hours, but that's a national record, shorter than Liz Truss's time in Downing Street. And we don't know what's going to happen, and we'll see. But I think it's a cliche, but let's use a cliche. France is politically on the brink. It's chaos because there are three blocs. No one is in a position really to absolutely dominate the political game. So you've got Pour Le Cornu trying to make concessions a little bit to the center-left, a little bit to the right, but as soon as he makes one to his left, the right is unhappy. So how can he form a government? It's going to be very hard, I think, for Macron to avoid another snap election.
Terry, Le Cornu would have had a case, would he not, if he'd gone to the National Assembly and said, listen, if you clowns bring down another government and cause another election, the French voters are going to hate all of us, you included.
Yes, certainly, because, just given the instability at the moment, it's going to be very difficult for whoever, even with a snap election, has to form the next government. There's still the issues that are behind all of this are not going to go away. The French budget is still going to have huge holes in it that whoever is in charge will have to try to resolve. And we know that Le Cornu has gone into the Élysée now, just a few minutes ago as we speak, to go in and talk to Macron and tell him, what he's discovered from his last couple of days of conversations. And I think, one of the problems is going to be he's trying to promise things to people, potentially like suspending the increase in the pension age, which is something that's going to cost a huge amount of money. But whatever he promises the other parties, it's just not going to be enough, because if he's, granting concessions to one side, somebody else is going to demand more concessions. I mean, there were reports earlier on suggesting that Le Cornu was going to come back and be given another chance to have another go at being Prime Minister, perhaps for her a whole 2 days. But his entourage was sort of denying that and saying, telling people not to spread fake news.
Philippe, seen from outside, there does appear among the parties in the National Assembly what you might call an adherence to the thinking of that great philosopher Groucho Marx, specifically whatever it is, I'm against it. Is that fair, or are there people in the National Assembly actually trying to pitch a positive idea for addressing some of the things a French government is going to have to address, like, for example, those cavernous holes in its public finances?
Yes, there's there's a lot of truth in your Groucho Marx quote, in a sense that everyone in the National Assembly, and of course in the wider public, is really fed up with the whole situation. And I don't, probably with the exception of a few Macronite faithful, I think everyone wants a snap election. Some even, and that's the case of Jean-Luc Mélenchon on the radical left, would want Macron to resign and have an early presidential election. But I think it's quite isolated. Although I was seeing polls that now a majority of French people are in support of that thing. So Macron is not absolutely safe in his job. But a snap election seems very likely now, because I think there are three scenarios. The first one is that Le Cornu manages really to form a new government. I think it will not last long, and it could be another prime minister. It will be the same. Second scenario, snap elections, and I think this time around the National Rally, the far right, will be in a very strong position, even stronger than a year ago, to win an absolute majority. And third is, I've just said it, Macron's resignation, because once you've exhausted all your options, and we must bear in mind, and all the chaos and mess started off a year ago when Macron, unfortunately, and that was probably the biggest political blunder in French political history, at least since the Second World War, was to call a snap election, having lost a European election. He didn't have to do that. His party was the main party in National Assembly. He didn't have an absolute majority, but he could govern quite okay like that, and decided, without any prior warning, without consulting with anyone in his own party, to call that election, which he lost. And I think that problem and that election sent those three blocs of equal strength, and no one can govern. It's absolutely unsustainable.
There will be a lot of nervous onlookers from outside France as well, Terry. Obviously, more than ever in the current context, France is an absolute pillar of Europe's defence, and Macron in particular has been pretty rock solid where Ukraine is concerned. It is unlikely, as Philip says, that he will announce that he's going to leave the presidency early, but a snap parliamentary election could theoretically make the National Assembly, who are somewhat Ukraine sceptic, much more powerful.
Yes, I mean that would be one of the issues there, because if you are an incoming government, and if you say if Le Pen's party were to do better at this election, and I think it's likely that the hollowing out of the centre of French politics would be something that would continue if there were another election. There might be a lot more reluctance to saying, if you're having to say we need austerity, we need not to spend so much money on our public spending, then why are we spending so much money, particularly on defence? And I think that might be an issue that even if Macron were still in post and were wanting to offer his support internationally to Ukraine and elsewhere in the world, that might put a lot more pressure on him in that regard as well.
Well, we will have much more on this across all our shows tomorrow beginning with The Globalist at 7 a.m. UK time. But now to Chicago, where hundreds of troops from the Texas National Guard, deployed on the order of US President Donald Trump, have begun looking for something to actually do. If any of them are tuning in while milling aimlessly about, Anish Kapoor's big chrome bean in Millennium Park really is kind of cool. There's an interesting-looking exhibition of 60s and 70s protest art at the Chicago History Museum, and the Cubs are hosting the Brewers at Wrigley Field tonight and Friday, but it is the Division Series, so tickets might be scarce, or the Friday game may not be happening if the Cubs, currently down 2-0, can't get their act together later on. Trump has declared that Chicago is a war zone, apparently propelled to these heights of dudgeon by protests against immigration officers. Terry, alert listeners will have discerned there a note of scepticism on my part that this is entirely necessary. Do you think it is urgent that the Texas National Guard restore law and order to the streets of Chicago?
No, I mean, it's clearly absolutely not urgent. I mean, the only urgency in it is, in Donald Trump's mind, that he feels the need to do this show of force, not only in Chicago, but in Portland as well. And what he clearly wants to do is have that fight with governors and with mayors and, with the kind of, like the mayor of Chicago is calling this illegal and unconstitutional. And, he's even said that he thinks the mayor and the governor should be jailed. So he's trying to do this as a big show, and to, even though, as you say, the mayor and the governor are signing orders saying that, ICE, troops can't go in there, that, they can't use public buildings, so they might not even be able to go to the museum because they might not be allowed there.
Philippe, as Terry notes, Trump is not content merely with deploying the National Guard to Chicago. He has said that Chicago's Mayor Brandon Johnson and the Governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker, should both be in jail. He's not really specified on what charges exactly, but it's the eternal question where Trump is concerned. Do you see any discernible strategy here in trying to wind things up to a potentially quite dangerous pitch, or is Trump just saying whatever pops into his head?
I think I would say that the language used by the American president is not particularly very nuanced and understated. It's quite the opposite. For instance, branding very mainstream figures and personalities of the Democratic Party as, far left, dangerous activists is absolutely over the top. But he does it all the time. Also, the question of what makes a war zone, I think he seems to be probably him and his ally in MAGA, the only ones to see that there's a war zone. I think that the people on the ground are certainly beg to differ, and I completely disagree with that. So I think it seems there's a lot of bad faith, and also he's looking for excuses to intervene. It's a show of strength, as Terry put it, and to say that really for his own electorate. And I think clearly this is very worrying, because what people have been doing, in fact, in those places, which are all red states, blue states, democratic, run by the Democratic Party, is that people have been simply protesting against U.S. immigration and custom enforcement, the so-called ICE, and its methods and its tactics. They are masked people who more and more increasingly seemed like a kind of a personal army, Trump's personal army, while they're really to serve his own political interests and agenda. And I think people are seeing through that, and they're protesting, which I think should be their right in a democratic country. And that's the reason why is launching this force. And I think just the point, the National Guard troops, I reckon, have limited power. This is also a very strange thing. Why is he sending the army, federal army, to a place where, in fact, they do not enforce the law or make arrests or searches? That's not part of their power. So I think it's a show. It's very symbolic. It's a way also to create, very reminiscent of the 1920s, 30s and the McCarthy era, the so-called Red Scare against communists at the time. And here you try to provoke fear amongst the public about so-called dangerous people, the use of Antifa, which he never defines. Antifa, sometimes you think it's a political party. Antifa is not a party. It's a nebulous network of activists, and they're really in a minority. That's not the problem. So lots of excuses, looking for trouble, and I think, of course, it's a way some critics argue. It's a way you mentioned, Andrew, the governor of Illinois, Pritzker, who said, well, that's an authoritarian march. And I think, yes, we can say it probably.
Terry, what have you made of how Pritzker and Mayor Johnson are playing this? Because I think they've been defiant. They've actually also both been at various points quite funny. Mayor Johnson has said today that this is not the first time that Donald Trump has tried to have a black man unjustly arrested. Governor Pritzker saying, I will not back down. That's probably the right things to be saying, but do we think that both these men, both being politicians, sense something of an opportunity here as well? I don't think it's news to anybody that Pritzker quite fancies being the Democratic nominee in the 2028 presidential election, should there in fact be one.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of interesting things going on here. On the one hand, you have the sort of the legal process, the states and the cities trying to say, the federal government or the National Guard from other states do not have these rights. The president simply does not have these rights, and trying to invoke the law to say this is not what you do. And I've seen, also in terms of Oregon and Portland, there's actually, trying to fight it slightly with humour also seems to work quite well. So I've seen, social media has been full of people saying these are pictures from war zone Portland, and it's, a lovely farmer's market, or some people going and picking pumpkins, or going for a nice walk along the river, and trying to, combat the perception that Trump is trying to create, that, which is for his own supporters, as Philippe rightly says, that, these are big, scary cities. You wouldn't want to go there. I've heard it's terrible. You see that a lot. You see people try to say that about London, and everyone says, have you actually been there lately? No, I haven't. But yes, I think, certainly for Democratic office holders, there is a certain advantage in trying to say we are standing up for the rights of our states and our citizens, and also we do not live in a hellhole.
The other card that Trump potentially has up his sleeve, Philippe, and he has telegraphed the possibility, is invoking the Insurrection Act, which would enable the dispatch of actual U.S. Army federal troops to American cities, as opposed to the National Guard, the reservists who he has sent so far. If you're just looking at this from the president's point of view, though, does that play for him? Because obviously maybe he's reasoning that, most of the people in cities like Portland and Chicago, Los Angeles, they're not going to vote for me anyway, so what do I care? But surely lots of his voters know people who live in those cities.
Yes, absolutely. And also, it seems really it's going to inflame the whole situation. I think if you send troops and give them, a sort of the power to arrest people, that will create violence, and if you do that on the scale of a state or a big city, that could be extremely dangerous, and that could probably create a havoc in a place. So I think it seems, of course, irresponsible. And again, you may wonder on which ground would he invoke that old legislation because, again, people on the ground, the governors, the mayor of the town of Chicago are saying, we're fine, we don't need you. I mean, that's what they say. And I think the governor of California also said it. You know, we don't want you here, Trump. We don't want your troop. We're doing fine. Why are you doing that? And of course, we know why he's doing that. He's playing very, very dangerous games for his own supporters. But of course, should a president of a big democracy such as US do that? Of course, I think a lot of people would think no, and that's the whole problem. Yeah.
Well, to Mount Everest, from which several hundred climbers, associated support staff and yaks have now safely descended after a few precarious days trapped higher than 5,000 metres by weather severe even by the standards of the region. Hundreds of local police, firefighters and other rescue workers and volunteers joined the rescue effort, all of which has renewed focus on why all these people went up there in the first place. Around 800 people climb Everest every year, despite a recent hike of permit fees. It is now $15,000 in peak season, and that's before you've paid for everything else, which can run to further multiples of that. It has nevertheless become a well-trodden path. An annual clean-up by the Nepalese army has since 2019 collected 119 tons of rubbish from Everest and 14 human corpses. Philippe, first of all, is this your idea of a good time? Have you ever voluntarily climbed up something you didn't really need to?
Well, I visited Japan this summer and I went to see Mount Fuji from close range, and I was very tempted. You know, would be nice, I thought, to do that, to climb up there. But then I realized there were lots of people, and I think that what's been happening at the Mount Everest, I think, is also happening in other parts of the world, which is a sort of overpopulation. Tourists, trekkers come there. I suppose most of them are serious. They are serious walkers. However, I think, as you put it, you know, it's not sustainable for the environment, and it's certainly also there are downsides. The fact that they need when there is poor weather to be rescued, so all that costs a lot of money. But I think it's a trend, and I think it's very very much part of globalization. People traveling more. And of course, you feel probably tempted to do that. Even I think when I was in Mount Fuji, a man of age 103 years climbed it, and I think that's quite remarkable. And I think more and more people want to take on those extreme sporting activities. We didn't hear of that before. I think it's part of new trends. Fair enough if people enjoy that, but of course it has serious downsides.
Well, indeed so. Terry, about 7,000 people have now climbed Mount Everest. Is that a number beyond which it's still actually impressive? Like, would you be excited if you met if you'd met somebody who climbed Mount Everest?
Yeah, I'd probably think it was pretty impressive. But I think one of the things that has changed here is, you know, the sheer numbers of people that are coming to Mount Everest from, like, the Chinese, from the Tibetan side of it, rather than just the Nepalese side. I mean, you know, more than 500,000 people visiting the Chinese side of Mount Everest, and new roads going in there. And one of the risks is that because it's got more accessible, people are just going in on a quick break, so they don't have time to acclimatise. They haven't got used to the altitude, and that means that people are more likely to get injured or get ill. And so I think it's the fact that, you know, probably it's a sign of China's increasing wealth that people think, you know, great, I'll just go there for a quick trip on my holiday. But, you know, the danger is that people think it's not difficult, and it is, you know, it's accessible. And that's why you end up not only with these huge queues of people trying to go up the mountain, but also with people who simply aren't prepared for it.
People do die climbing it actually fairly regularly. But just before we move off this item, I wanted to ask you both in turn quite quickly. You first, Philippe. Is there anything comparable, some sort of great milestone of that sort, whether it's, I don't know, finding the source of the Amazon or whatever, that you would actually like to do, however many other people might already have done it?
As I say, climbing a sort of very nice mountain, I mentioned Mount Fuji, would be something I would consider. But I think, given what it does to the environment, given the cost, you also gave a few figures, I think probably would prefer to save my money and spend it differently. But I think there are other things that, climbing mountains, there are for instance, sporting activities that you can take on at a certain age, and it's a challenge and you relish the challenge. And if you do that, probably if you like running a marathon and that's something probably also a lot of people take on, running, cycling, swimming, whatever you want in certain exotic places. And I think, again, people, probably it's a sign of wealth, it's a sign of transportation being easier. And of course, that's an inevitable trend.
What about you, Terry? Because my own people, those of Australia, we're not a great mountaineering folk. I do realise that the first person aboard Everest was a New Zealander, which is still something of a sore point with us. But our highest peak back in the old country, Mount Kosciuszko, you can kind of just stroll up in an afternoon. It's not a tough one.
I tend to favour, a nice Alp with, a restaurant on the top of it. You might have a restaurant on the top,
and ideally some sort of cable car.
Yeah. But I say everyone I know seems to be doing these long hikes, whether it's like Hadrian's Wall or a cross country or some long national path. And occasionally I sort of think, should I do that? And again, nice one through the Alps, bit of sort of northern Italy, Austria, maybe. But I always think might be nice to do, and I never actually look into doing it. So.
Well, here in the UK, a blow to a nation's fondly indulged self-image of absolutely not being a bunch of simpering, rope-jumping Fotherington Thomases who cannot hold their beer. Research by Boffins has determined that fully 1 in 3 UK workers has phoned in sick the morning after a works drink event or merely unofficial wassailing with colleagues. We learn furthermore that 41% of 18 to 24-year-olds have been too hungover to work at least once, rising to 47% of 25 to 34-year-olds. Terry, you are here at this table speaking on behalf of every single person in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Does this surprise you? And more to the point, have you ever phoned in sick with a hangover?
I'm surprised the figure is that low. But
I know this has got one of those surveys.
These are young people who did not work in a British office during the 1990s,
and possibly
where people were constantly drunk, as far as
possibly were not journalists.
Possibly were not born. Probably, yeah.
Possibly were not born.
I think what people did more often, certainly from what I can remember of those days, is that you never phoned in sick the day after the office party because everyone knew that was why you were phoning in sick. So everybody turned up diligently and sort of looked glassy-eyed. I noticed in that article it said there's a productivity crisis of people who are coming to work with hangovers, and that would be something I would recognise. Yeah.
Philippe, as an outsider to this country, much as I am, are you somewhat baffled though by the British culture of after-work boozing generally? Is this as much of a thing in France, or do you all go, as stereotype would suggest, to a stylish little cafe, have a small glass of wine each, and discuss philosophy while somebody plays mournful accordion in the background?
Yes, I think when I came to work and live in this country, that was over 30 years ago, quite a long time ago. Yes, I was a bit struck by this after-work drink culture. The fact that, in academia, not simply in journalism or in business, people would say, hey, let's go and have a drink or two. It's when the or two that becomes a little bit worrying, and because yes, it can't be one drink. It's at least two, and if not more, if you're accompanied by a third or fourth person. So yes, there was a lot of drinking, and I think probably things have receded a little bit since then. And also I remember 30 years ago, I was a young lecturer, so probably students would confide to me more easily and say, well, yesterday I got completely smashed, and talking, I discovered, the concept of binge drinking, for instance. I had never heard of that before. Or at least I had not practiced it. And it's the quantity of alcohol being absorbed in a very short, limited amount of time without eating food with it. That's really the main crime for a French person. Drinking alcohol is fine, but if you don't eat, this is barbaric.
This, Terry, is the thing that has always baffled me. It's that thing of just leaving the office, going to the pub and thinking, Could we not stop and get something to eat on the way, rather than let's all get completely hammered and then have a rancid kebab?
One packet of crisps for the table.
Exactly,
and
have a rancid kebab near the tube stop at 11 o'clock.
Yeah, that was tradition. I mean, but the culture has changed so much. I think I've harking back to I remember in sort of offices in the 90s, there would be places that would have drinks trolleys come round towards the end of a radio show, like we should have one coming in now with a nice gin and tonic. And that was literally what happened every day. And the idea of light sort of being abstemious was not going to the pub on a Monday. That was really how it was. So I think it has changed a bit.
Well, on that happy nostalgic thought, Terry Stiastny and Philip Marlier, thank you both for joining us. Finally, on today's show, on August the 1st, 2024, one of the most extraordinary prisoner swaps in history between Russia, the US, Germany and other allies took place on an airport tarmac in Turkey. Among the 26 people exchanged were Russian spies, dissidents and American prisoners, including the Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich. Two of Gershkovich's colleagues at the Journal, Drew Hinshaw and Joe Parkinson, have written about the murky new world of prisoner exchanges in a new book entitled Swap, A Secret History of the New Cold War. They spoke to Monocle's Chris Chermak, who began by asking Joe about how Evan Gershkovich has been doing since his release.
Evan is doing amazingly well, especially considering everything that he's been through. I think it was very special for us at the Wall Street Journal to watch the way that he seemed to be dealing with, and those images from inside the glass cage in a Moscow courthouse, just how positive and stoic he seemed to be in that kind of unimaginable situation. He's been busy writing his memoir. It's going to be absolutely unmissable, coming out next summer, as far as we're aware.
Drew, Evan and his story was such a reason for writing this book, of course, but how much did you actually know about this whole modern day post-Cold War, return to Cold War spy game that was underway before you started researching all of this?
This became for us a window into how the world really works. We had one colleague taken and set out, we were asked by the paper to do the investigative work of understanding why he'd been taken, what the game that was being played here was. And very quickly we realized that this was at the heart of the US-Russia relationship, that Russia was stockpiling Americans, a history teacher, former Marines, basketball player Brittany Griner, our friend Evan, other journalists. And what Russia wanted with these prisoners was to trade them for spies, deep cover illegal spies based in Slovenia, a murderer based in Germany, various hackers and cyber criminals held in America. In some ways, this is a return to the Cold War because we all saw the spy swaps where, spies cross each other in East Germany on the bridge in Berlin. But that was spies for spies. What was really piratical and frightening was Russia was playing a game where it was exchanging basically ordinary, if notable, Americans for spies and even a murderer. And that was a threshold that had never been crossed, even in the Cold War.
Drew, you and your colleagues obviously found yourself at the center of this, not only investigating, as you described it, you were sort of set out to investigate why Evan was taken, but then there is also this whole campaign rallying support for him, securing his release. And this is also such a strange element of this world, the fact that different prisoners and their families are having to campaign on their own behalf, raising their own cases, profiles. Was there an understanding at the Journal that kind of maintaining pressure, the profile of this case was almost directly linked to whether Evan would be released or not?
That is one of the strangest things about this modern game of hostage trading, of bartering in prisoners, is that there is really no comparison to the power of a family member or someone's friends to go out there and humanize them. We embarked in this world thinking this is a world of CIA spies meeting FSB officers and back alleys in the Middle East and other places. And to some extent it is. But it's also a story of ordinary Americans who woke up one morning to find out that their loved one was in prison and having to go out there and figure out how to convince their government and the Russian government to do a deal.
I would just add to that and say that one of the really fascinating things about this world, and it's this hidden world of diplomacy that lurks just beneath the surface. There are these extraordinary characters everywhere. We've alluded to a few of them already in this conversation, the deep cover spies, the ordinary families. They're really the heart and soul of the book. People trying to navigate complicated bureaucracies and compete with much bigger institutions to try and bring their loved ones home. But also in this space are a bunch of people you would never expect to find. Celebrities, some of the top executives from Silicon Valley playing a back channel role, often moving messages between Moscow and Washington at a time where the countries obviously have become much, much more antagonistic. It is really a spy thriller with all of these kind of contemporary characteristics of sort of celebrity culture for the internet age.
And just to follow up on that, Joe, to bring it to the moral side of this, because that is also what's interesting, there was clearly some awareness, even among the journal, among families, that if you are looking for a prisoner exchange, campaigning, who is being released on the other side was a very difficult topic. And I wonder also if you could go into the politics there. There was this fascinating, as you described, basically a switch in the U.S. administration from saying we don't negotiate to creating an office that dealt with hostage relations. Is there a feeling that discouraged hostage taking by Vladimir Putin, or was this all just a sort of inevitable reality that they had no choice but to deal with?
What Putin managed to touch on with this strategy is several sort of fundamental asymmetries. Russia is an autocratic society where there's not really public pressure to bring people home. America is a free society where there's public pressure from loved ones, from institutions, from all sorts of places. And so the government is really caught between a rock and a hard place. The fact is that countries like Russia and other autocracies like China and Venezuela and others do this because it works. And that puts whatever administration, the Trump administration, the Biden administration, and their predecessors in a really, really tough position. Because if you start letting people go, you might encourage the practice more. But if you don't let people go, then what differentiates you as a free society from the unfree society? And I think what the Biden administration tried to do after Trump's more kind of personalized sort of freewheeling approach to this was to create a structure to systematize this. And what they ended up managing to pull off was this incredible prisoner swap last year that brought Evan home and 25 other people.
Drew, one of the sort of breaking news aspects, I suppose, of your book is, though, that this swap could have happened earlier and could have included the Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny. He died at a time when a prisoner exchange had actually been agreed, amazingly even signed off by Vladimir Putin himself. Just walk us through that moment in time.
We at the Journal knew about this. We knew that there was an agreement to at least pursue a prisoner exchange. That freed a murderer from a German jail cell, Vadim Krasikov. He killed a Putin opponent in Berlin. And in return, Germany would get Russia's most famous dissident, Alexei Navalny, who had survived all these poisonings. And packaged into it, we would get our friend and colleague Evan Gershkovich back, and a whole bunch of other Americans would come home. And we believed it was like only a few weeks away. We had written the stories, Alexei Navalny free, Evan Gershkovich free. We'd written these stories ready to hit publish the moment they walked. And then all of a sudden the news breaks that Alexei Navalny had died in prison. Nobody saw that coming. And when it happened, it hit us like a baseball bat to the chest. We thought, that's it. Evan's going to be in jail for years. Navalny is dead. And at that point, we didn't think any deal was possible. But what we didn't know is that was the very moment when there was a little bit of movement and things were starting to shake loose that would ultimately bring this deal to fruition.
Drew Hinshaw and Joe Parkinson from the Wall Street Journal there speaking to Chris Chermak about their new book, Swap, A Secret History of the New Cold War. That is all for this edition of The Daily. Thanks to our panellists today, Philippe Mallier and Terry Stiasny. The show was produced by Hassan Anderson and researched by Joanna Moser. Our sound engineer was Steph Chungu. I'm Andrew Muller here in London. The Daily is back at the same time tomorrow. Thanks for listening.